Hello and welcome to today's Partner InfoP web conference. You've joined us for a fast track for D365 for Operations, Tech Talk, Visual Studio Team Services Setup. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior Solutions Architect Archana Prasad. Archana, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Janice. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Tech Talk for setting up Visual Studio Team Services for Dynamics 365 for Operations. Before I start off, I'd just like to clarify that I may be using the terminology D365, which essentially means Dynamics 365 for Operations, which was formerly known as New Microsoft Dynamics AX or commonly known as AX7. So just want to make sure that there's some confusion regarding the terminology. All right. During this presentation, what we are trying to walk through is to make sure that you get an insight into why we are asking for VSTS to be set up and how to actually create the VSTS account, as well as we'll also be touching lightly on the users for VSTS. So one of the common questions that come across, at least my wise, why do we need VSTS? Why do we need Visual Studio Team Services? And how does that incorporate into the D365 or Dynamics 365 implementations? Why do we need Visual Studio right now, especially from customers or partners who have been used to the prior versions of AX? So a quick or brief insight into that. So Visual Studio Team Services, it was formerly known as VSO, and Visual Studio 2015, used for totally two different purposes. Visual Studio is a software development environment. As you might know, it's built on the .NET framework, and that's designed for managing projects and development work. This is currently the IDE, or the Integrated Development Environment for Dynamics 365 for Operations. VSTS, on the other hand, it is an extension of this Microsoft Visual Studio architecture. It allows you to use tools such as source control, collaboration, reporting, and other development tools. Now, in the case of Visual Studio 2015, from a licensing point of view, the Visual Studio license subscription does not come along with your Dynamics 365 licensing. Dynamics 365 does support and does provide the option to choose either professional or the enterprise edition of Visual Studio, but from a licensing point of view, that is separately licensed. So, and it's also licensed to the individual developer or the individual user. You will have to make sure that you purchase the appropriate level Visual Studio subscription for each of the users who will be either developing or will be using this application for the Dynamics 365 implementation. And it has to be purchased via the reseller. In the case of Visual Studio Team Services, the account is free. You can sign up for it free. And the free VSTS account, what it comes with is unlimited stakeholder users, 5 basic users, and you do have unlimited Visual Studio subscribers, and most importantly, 1 build agent. When I say stakeholders, I mean the users who need to add and edit work items, bugs, you need to view your dashboard, etc. Basic users are the ones who will need to access the version control, continuous integration, agile planning, etc. Do note that it comes with only 1 build agent, which is sufficient in the case of Dynamics 365 implementation. If you have to have more than 1 build agent for any other purposes, whether it is, let's say, for probably cloud-based load testing or for any other purposes, you will have to set up billing with Azure. You need to purchase any kind of additional services. In this case, let's say an additional build agent. That is where you'll have to set up the additional billing. But for the purpose of the Dynamics 365 implementation, you can actually set up a free VSTS account, and as stated, this is what the free VSTS account comes with. Moving on to the next slide. So why do we need this VSTS setup? So for Dynamics 365 for Operations, or for D365, VSTS is not just for version control, it's also used for build deployment. When I say build deployment, in this case, our hotfixes for Dynamics 365 for Operations, they are released as X++. So this metadata fix installation that needs to go into your dev box. You will need to modify and resolve the conflicts, and you will then check in the fix into VSTS, and then you will run the builds to generate what we call as a deployable package. And it is this package that you would be using to move your code or your customization across these different environments. So, which is the primary reason why, in order to deploy the build environment, you will have to make sure that your LCS, which is the lifecycle services, where your complete application lifecycle management for D365 is currently will be executed, that needs to be connected to a VSTS account. Similarly, from a support point of view, in LCS, in lifecycle services, we do provide a one-stop shop where you will be able to file your support tickets through LCS. Besides filing it from your Dynamics 365 client, you will also be able to file it through LCS. Now, by providing integration between LCS and VSTS, you'll be able to track the support instance as work items in your VSTS. Similarly, for business process modeler library, which is BPM library, there is an integration that is provided to connect your LCS to your VSTS project, which will ensure that you will be able to again track all these business processes as a hierarchy of work items in your VSTS. One of the, going a little off track here, for this particular feature to work, to make sure that you can integrate your BPM processes or BPM hierarchy to VSTS, you will have to ensure that you turn on a preview feature called VSO work item mapping. Quickly want to show you where that is. So I'm going to be sharing the edge for a bit, just so you might see a slight lag there. So this is your lifecycle services. On your home page, there's a tab called Preview Feature Management. When you click on that, you would see all the public preview features out here, VSO work item mapping. This is the one that you will need to enable, which would help you if you go into Business Process Modeler. And how you would do that is Lifecycle Services. You can click on Business Process Modeler. You will land in this page. This will give you the provision to enable integration between your Business Process Modeler hierarchy within Lifecycle Services to your VSTS project. Slide off track there. Going back to our PowerPoint. So that's where the integration of the BPM and VSTS, as I've just now showed, that is where you can actually set that up within Lifecycle Services. Another reason why I would want VSTS set up is with respect to code upgrade. So the code upgrade services will connect to your VSTS account, and it will upgrade the code in there, and it would be created in a new branch. So these are the different aspects where VSTS plays a role in the implementation for Dynamics 365. So let's walk through quickly. I do have the screenshots stated here. In between, I'll try to actually show you where some of the setup is in the browser. So creating a VSTS account, we'll be going to www.visualstudio.com. There is an option that says Free Visual Studio. Click on that. That will take you to this page. And you can see there's three blocks. The middle block that says Visual Studio Team Services. Click on Free Account. And it'll open up your sign-in page. The recommendation is to sign in with the work account of the user who will be the VSTS account owner. One of the reasons why we suggest or recommend not to use your live ID, not to use any of your Hotmail ID, but go with your work account is you would notice that live ID or Hotmail, for example, that is not supported for login into your lifecycle services, or for that matter for AX, or in this case Dynamics 365 client. So from a point of view, from a web where you can ensure that there's consistency in the way the users are logging into all these different applications that are involved in Dynamics 365 implementation, the recommendation is to make sure that you sign in with your work account, just to bring in that consistency across the different systems. Also, you can find this user in the Azure portal by making sure that you're actually signing in with your work account. And VSTS owner will be the user who's creating the VSTS account. In this case, will turn out to be a VSTS account owner. Another recommendation that we do make sure that we do convey to our customers is it would make sense to make this a generic account than your own work account. so that at any point of time, if the user were to leave the company or to move across to a different business unit, you will still have, or the rest of the team members will still have access to VSTS, provided you're creating a generic VSTS account owner that can be accessed by multiple people or at least one or two admins, and so that there is no fear of having to change the account owner if there is if the person were to move out of the organization, or there was a restructuring. That's it, and then there is a way to update or change your VSTS account owner, but something to keep in mind. The next page that opens up expects you to actually create your account with a customer-specific URL, and the version control that we are supporting at this instance is Team Foundation version control. Git is not supported at this instance. Once you click continue, this particular customer-specific URL that you've created, a VSTS account will then be created with that particular specific URL. It will also, by default, create a project called the My First Project the first time that you're creating this account. Now, just in case you already have a VSTS account, then you can go ahead and sign into the VSTS account with the customer-specific URL that you have, and whether you have a new account or whether you've just created, whether you already have an existing account or whether you have just created a new account, the very next step that we are now going to walk through is to create a new project. There are two ways you can actually create a new VSTS project. You can either click Account Home, and then under Recent Projects, you can click New Project, or as shown in the screenshot right below the last menu item, you can say click on New Team Project, and that will open up this particular dialog box that you're seeing on the screen. Enter the project name, a process template, and the version control. As I had stated earlier, Git is not supported, so please go with Team Foundation version control. Now that you've set up the customer-specific URL, now that set up your VSTS URL, the next step that we need to do is create a personal access token. Where this comes into picture is ultimately all these steps that we are taking is to make sure that you can integrate your VSTS account with your lifecycle services project. And a couple of parameters that LCS requires to connect with the VSTS account. One is the customer-specific URL to understand which VSTS project it should connect to. Second is to ensure that, hey, this person is authorized to access this particular VSTS project. So for that reason, whoever was creating this VSTS account will turn out to be the VSTS account owner. They will have to create a personal access token, which will then be pasted back to the LCS project. So now to go through the create personal access token, you'll be clicking on the name on the top right of your home page for VSTS and click on security. This would open up the menu item that you see out here. On the left-hand navigation pane, you can click Personal Access Token. Click on Add, which will then open up this dialog box that you're seeing on the lower right-hand corner. The description, put a description, and expires, and usually you would get 90 days, 180 days, and then 1 year. Recommendation is to use the maximum duration of 1 year. Go for Select All Scopes, and click, there will be a little button there at the bottom that says Put Create Token. Now, make sure to copy this token value and put it somewhere because this is what you will need to paste this exact token into the LCS project. So once you move away from this page, this is not stored in your VSTS account and you'll not be able to see it again. So please make sure that at this stage you're copying it and you're saving it. All right, so now we're jumping directly into your VSTS account to ensure that this particular step is applicable only if you already have a VSTS account set up. For a new VSTS account, no agents will be registered, as you can see in this screenshot. So how you would access is click on Settings. In the new VSTS UI, you will see Settings is in the form of a gear. Click on that. You will see this Agent Queues. Click on Agent Queues tab. And the verification of whether there's a build agent available for any of these queues, as I mentioned earlier, you'll need to do it only if you have already had an existing VSTS account. by default, when you set it up initially for a new VSTS or a VSTS account, you will not be having any agents registered there yet. If you already have one existing, click through all these queues and click through all these queues and make sure that you do not have a build agent. The main reason for it, I'm going to switch back to the very first slide where we said that the free VSTS comes with just one build agent. So if that build agent is already being used, we will need to make sure that it is either unchecked, or you will need to figure out, should you buy as an organization an additional build agent so that that can be used for the Dynamics 365 implementation. Couple of prerequisites that are very specific for Dynamics 365 implementation. So as you might all be aware, the Dynamics 365 for operations, the subscription offer comes with a build environment, which can either be deployed as a build environment or as a dev environment. So for that build environment deployment, we have some checks that are in place that verifies and validates that the very first step that we will want to make sure is that there is a VSTS account set up, which is what you would see if you had just recently set up your LCS. The very first thing that you have seen under Action Center in LCS on your left-hand side, it would have said, hey, set up VSTS, and you would also have seen on the right-hand side of your LCS homepage the 3 different enrollments that comes along with your Dynamics 365 subscription. You would have seen that the configure button under the last enrollment, which is your sandbox development and test, you would have noticed it's grayed out. That's because VSTS is not set up. And you would see that once you walk through the steps that we're actually now walking through, that button gets activated. Now, when you deploy that enrollment as a build enrollment, there are certain checks that we want to make sure. One is, of course, a VSTS account setup, but there are a few other checks that actually goes on in the background, and we want to make sure that you actually get that set up, because if these are not set up, your build enrollment the deployment is actually gonna fail. So one is ensure that a default pool exists. Now, this gets created, the pool by the name default, it gets created as soon as a VSTS account is created. You are welcome to choose a different pool, but then you have to make sure that the rest of the steps that you're taking for the user is against that particular pool if you're going to create a new pool. You also will need to make sure that when you deploy the build environment that you're choosing the right pool. If you're not planning to use the default pool, please ensure that whichever pool that you're actually creating to be used for the Dynamics 365 build environment, choose that correctly when you're deploying the build environment through LCS. These are the prerequisites that is required for the user. They need to be a basic user. When I say they, the VSTS user whose personal access token, in this case, if you're not planning to use the VSTS account owner's personal access token, if you plan to use any other user's personal access token and use that for setting up VSTS and LCS, and I'll get to that slide and you will understand what I'm talking about, how do you set up the LCS integration with VSTS, but whose personal access token that you'll be using in LCS, make sure that that person is at a minimum basic user. They are added to the administrator group for the default agent pool. And on the queue, when they're added, if they're not administrators, there's an option to add them as either reader, user, or administrator for that queue. Make sure they have at least user permissions. All right, moving on to, this is where, so once that is set up, so what we have done in the previous slide, or what we've done so far, is ensuring that you create a new VSTS account if you don't have one that's already existing, creating a new project, ensuring that you don't have any build agents associated with the queue or with the pool that you intend to use. And for the pool, you're ensuring that the user whose personal access token that you will be using has the right level of permissions and right authorization to deploy build environment LCS. So once you set up all of that, you're going to log into your LCS project and click Set Up Visual Studio Team Services. So this is for all those users, if you have not done it the first time, this is where you'll be setting up. Another place where you will be able to access this is right next to Lifecycle Services. You'll see that hamburger menu item, hamburger icon. Just click on that, You can go to project settings. You can access this setup of Visual Studio Team services from the same location. Once you click on that, that would actually take you to the page where it says Set up Visual Studio Team Services. And as I mentioned before, you can also access it through your project settings. Enter the VSTS URL, the customer-specific URL that you had created at the beginning of this walkthrough. Personal access token, whatever that you had created earlier, and you hopefully have saved it somewhere. Paste the personal access token and click Continue. This is where you will choose the project that you have created specifically for this Dynamics 6 implementation, and you can click Continue. And you will be authorizing. So essentially what this authorize does is that it gives Lifecycle Services project the authority to access the Visual Studio Team Services account that you have created. One thing you will notice is that even though the VSTS account owner or the person who is actually setting up this integration, even though they have actually clicked Authorize, this Authorize button is going to pop up for every other user who will be logging into Lifecycle Services. In other words, every individual user just because the Lifecycle Services project, the implementation project is tied to your VSTS account or VSTS project, doesn't mean that it gives each and every user that logs into Lifecycle Services the authority to access VSTS. They will have to explicitly click on Authorize to gain access, and if they do not have access in VSTS, then of course the redirected URL will say, hey, you do not have authority to access VSTS. It's kind of like we are ensuring that you explicitly authorize yourself as a user with the right permissions to access the VSTS account configured with the LCS project. It was like when you're about to be redirected, what it does is when you click Authorize, it redirects you to your VSTS account, and it says Proceed. You can say click Yes. And this is where you would see the authorized application where you can accept. And once you get back to your project settings, Visual Studio Team Services, what you would see is that your setup of integration between LCS implementation project and your VSTS is complete. It would show you all these work item mappings. This is kind of tying it back to what we mentioned a while earlier as to why we need VSTS. You have your BPM library, you have your support tickets. If you would want to track that, in LCS they might appear as a business process. In LCS they might be a support issue, but you can track them as either work items or some other VSTS work item type in your VSTS. So this is where the work item type mapping comes into picture. You can click Save, and that sums up the complete LCS integration with VSTS. A couple of notes that we want to kind of highlight with respect to the users. In the case of Dynamics 365 implementation, essentially the LCS project is set up against the customer tenant, which means that customer will have to explicitly add users from any other tenant, either it's from partner organization or from Microsoft for that matter. Now, that would mean that we are from a different tenant other than the customers. When you're from a different a non-customer tenant, what are the different ways where you could now access VSTS? Because when you log in, you're going to see the exact same that authorize button for in LCS. When you click on authorize, essentially it is checking whether as a user you have access to VSTS. So how should you be adding users from a different tenant or different Active Directory to your VSTS? So one of the options is you can create a new work account for the partner against your tenant. As in, from a customer or point of view, the customers can create a work account for the partner as at customer.com. In other words, you're actually creating a new user against your Azure Active Directory for each of the individual partner users that will be working on this particular project. Or the other option is you can add the partner's Microsoft account to the customer's Azure Active Directory. What we would recommend is if the Microsoft account that the partner user or the partner developer has, if it is already associated with an MSDA subscription, it would make sense to add that particular email ID. Which the reason for that is you have to remember the free VSTS account comes with only 5 basic users. So if you have to add any of these users as basic, by adding their email ID that is associated with MSDN subscription, you can add them under the category of unlimited Visual Studio subscribers. So they will not take up that access level as basic. Something to consider. So that's the second point that states there. Make sure that the access, when you add the user to your team services, make sure that the access level is set to not basic, but Visual Studio or MSDN subscriber. Another option, which is a kind of B2B option, essentially is to create the partner user as an external user against customers' AAT. I have provided the link there, which will actually walk you through step by step how is it that you can actually create the partner as an external user. But point to note, there are certain limitations for the external users. For example, multi-factor authentication, that's not supported on external users. If the partner org does not have MFA or multi-factor authentication. Similarly, you cannot, even though you say you can add external user, that those invitations to add the external users cannot be sent to consumer email addresses like hotmail.com for that matter. You will not be able to add the external user with their Hotmail email ID. It has to be their work account. We have not tested external users' access to on-premise applications. Also, when the actual user is deleted from the directory, you will have to manually go and delete this external user from your AAT. I believe there's also a limitation from a Power BI point of view. So there is a limitation with respect to these external users. The access by external users to your Power BI dashboards, it's not currently supported. You can share the Power BI dashboards, but you cannot give them direct access to your dashboards if they are logging in with their external user account. Was there something else? I believe even if you're, the other aspect is even if you're adding this external use, again, this partner as at partner.com, if you're adding them as an external user as an admin, they will not be able to add users from partner companies to directories outside their home directory. So a couple of points to take into consideration when you are trying to add users from the partner Azure Active Directory to the customer or customer VSTS. Providing a link out here, we'll be sharing this deck with you. So this link will walk you through the common integration errors that we have seen across the board and how to resolve this. So if you were to actually deploy your build environment in VSTS and you will happen to run into any of the errors that's stated out here, the resolutions are provided there for you to resolve it and then try the build deployment all over again. Just wanted to put this link out here as well. It is not effective yet. Essentially, there are steps that are being taken by the Visual Studio Team Services team to block those users who access to VSTS with an email ID, which is your Microsoft account email ID, but it is the same as that of your work account. So let's say if you have abc@contesto.com, that is your work email ID, and you have the exact same email ID set up as your Microsoft account. So far, we have allowed access to VSTS with that particular ID. But right now, there are plans it's not effective yet. You can, that's a live blog. You can actually go to that link and see what's the latest update. But sometime in 2017, there are plans to make sure that users are not going to be able to use email IDs that are exactly the email IDs that are Microsoft accounts that are exactly the same as that of your work account. All right, so that's about it. Let me quickly jump to our question and answer sessions to see if we have any questions set up there.
Okay. All right. Oh, thanks, Archana. While you're doing that, I just want to bring the audience attention to a link that I just posted in the messages panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. Before we get started with Q&A, I'd just like to also give another reminder. If you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and click on the messages button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Type your question into the white text box and then click send, and we will address those as they come in. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Archana. Archana, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Janice. So we just seem to have, seems like our work item mapping is a hot topic. So one of the questions, I've only been able to have work items created from the BPM with the LCS work item type business process. How do I get VSTS work item created from the other selections of LCS work item types, risks, issues, change requests, etc.? Great question. I must admit that this is something that I'm following up on as well. The work item mapping is coming from the process template that's being created. So in this case, I think if you say Agile, you get certain work item types. If you say, I believe, Scrum, you get certain other work item types. But that's said and done. This is something that I'll have to follow up on. I do not have a direct answer as to how do we get it created for other LCS work item types. At this instance, it looks like it always goes, the mapping always goes from BPM as LCS work item type business processes. So that is something we will follow up on, and we will get an answer for you on that. The other question that I see is, can the business process level 1 to 4 be mapped to anything else besides epic or feature? What if you have business process level 5 and lower? So this work item mapping is purely coming from, the mapping is purely coming from the process template that you've chosen when you create the team project. So which means that if it is, if you have business process level 5 and lower, you should be able to map it to something else if your process template is different. Is the build agent, sorry. I think I lost the question there. I thought I saw something about the recording, or did I miss that? I thought the question was about whether the recording will be shared, I believe.
Yes, I actually just answered that one. Today's recording will be shared within 72 hours post-conference. You'll want to look for a follow-up email from Event Builder with details on how to access that.
Thanks, Janice. Is a build agent deployed during the build environment creation? That is another question that has popped up. It is not deployed. You will have to download the agent and we'll have to deploy it at your end. Unless, of course, as I mentioned, if the VSTS agent, if the VSTS account was already existing and you have deployed the build agent for some other purposes or for any other projects, of course, you will already have a build agent. But as part of the deployment of the build environment, you will be actually downloading a build agent. Sorry, I'm not answering it correctly at all. I went off track. The build agent is indeed deployed during the build environment creation, which is the reason why we are going there and ensuring that there are no build agents created or being used by your VSTS account. My apologies. So in case if it is being used, and if you would like to use the same VSTS account and you do not want to purchase another build agent, what we would recommend is either delete that build agent off or uncheck it. So sorry, the answer to that is the build agent is indeed deployed during build environment creation. Is there a way to change the way you manage the code after the VS account is linked to LCS? I would probably want a bit more detail to that when someone says manage the code, because at the end of the day, if you would like to, our recommendation is if you would like to, not if you would like to, if you need to move your code artifacts between the different environments. So as I mentioned a while earlier, for the Dynamics 365 subscription, there are 3 different environments that are deployed, which is your sandbox development and test, your sandbox acceptance and staging, and then production. So if you want to move your artifacts between from dev to UAT and then UAT to production, the mode of or the artifact needs to be a software deployable package, which means at the end of the day, regardless of where or how you manage your code, it still needs to be a part of VSTS, and you will still need to resolve the conflicts in VSTS, and you'll still need to create a build and a deployable package in VSTS, and then use that deployable package to move it across the environments. Another question, why does a development environment deployed to Azure as a cloud-hosted environment include both a dev and a build system, but a locally deployed dev environment only include a single system? Good question. It looks like your build system or the tools that actually comes as part of, it is actually a part of your enterprise agreement. So only if you are purchasing your enterprise agreement, you seem to have access to the build integration tools and your build system. That said, if anyone else on the call from my team, if you have any better answer with respect to why do we not provide the build system with cloud-hosted environments against the customer subscription? Do we have any other thoughts on that? Okay, looks like not. So at this instance, that is how the whole licensing system is set up. So if you have the enterprise agreement, you do have the option to deploy your tier 1 as either a development environment or as a build environment. So the build integration helps you to, like I said, create a deployable package and then move it across your different systems. Why would you want BPM items to go to VSTS? Explain the scenario, please. So it's purely a process dependent on how you would want to maintain your scenarios and your tasks and your deliverables. So there are scenarios and there are customers who actually already have the BPM set up, the business process set up, but they do not necessarily want every user to have access to LCS. So and they rather have people track the deliverables and the tasks and the completion and all of that in VSTS. At the same time, they do have all the business process set up either as part of their prior implementation or when I say prior implementation, in prior versions of AX, they do have BPM, which they would want to actually integrate into the LCS for Dynamics 365. But nor do they really want each and every user to be actually navigating through the BPM or business process model hierarchy within LCS. They rather that the users track it and keep an eye on. And also with respect to different business teams, depending on the business process we are talking about, and depending on the number of users they have, they rather have people actually logging into VSTS and not LCS. All right. LCS VSTS integration. Create a requirement in BPM and see what shows up in VSTS. I do not have that set up at this instance for the demo project that I have, but for that particular question, that is something I would strongly recommend you to work with your fast track solution architect. And if you have any questions on that, you can always raise it in our tech talks or raise it with your solution architect. I guess that's about it. Have I answered any other questions? Have I missed out on any specific question and that needs to be answered and you would want to bring it up? To clarify my question about BPM and VSTS, when I said users want to go into VSTS, did I mean business users? Only developers would be in VSTS, wouldn't I? I have seen business users actually tracking deliverables and work items in VSTS, not just developers. developers may have, that's the reason why the free VSTS account comes up with unlimited stakeholders and, like I said, 5 basic users. So developers may have the basic access level, but we do have business users being created as unlimited stakeholders and as a stakeholder access level, and who they do use the TFS aspect of VSTS to track the work items as well as track the bugs and look into the business scenarios and deliverables, all of that. So business users do have access. They do have access to VSTS, not just developers. Hopefully that answered that question. All right. That seems to be the list of questions that I can see at my end. And anything else? I'm going to give it another 30 seconds to see if anything else is going to pop up. And in the meantime, Janice, I believe you have already given an overview about the survey.
Yes, I'll go ahead and mention that again. Again, I just posted the link in the conversation pane there on the left-hand side of your screen. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference. And again, we hope that you take just a minute or two to fill that out. We would appreciate it. We hope that you found today's information helpful. And if you enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is certainly your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And I don't see any new questions in the Q&A panel, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this session up. Attendees can access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered within 3 to 5 business days post-conference. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Arshana, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. This does conclude today's web conference, and you may now disconnect from the broadcast.